In December 1945, 5 United States Navy planes took off from Florida on a routine training flight. The weather was fine. The crews were experienced enough. They flew east over the ocean, exactly as planned. And then they simply never came back. For nearly 2 hours, we can hear them. Their radio calls were recorded. And the calls grow stranger and stranger. The compasses, the flight leader says, have stopped making sense. He thinks he is in one place, he is almost certainly in another. 14 men talking calmly at first, then less calmly, as the coast they are searching for refuses to appear. And here is the part that turned a tragedy into a legend. The Navy sent a rescue plane after them with 13 more men aboard. That plane vanished too. This is the story of Flight 19, the most famous disappearance in the history of flight, and how an accident we can mostly explain became a mystery the world still can't let go of. This is the Long Archives, where we separate what actually happened from the legend that grew on top of it. If that's the kind of story you like. Facts first, myth labeled as myth. Subscribe and stay to the end. To understand how 5 aircraft could be lost on a clear afternoon, you have to start with how ordinary that afternoon was meant to be. The date was the 5th of December, 1945. The Second World War had ended only a few months earlier, and at Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale on the coast of Florida, the work now was training. The aircraft were Grumman Avengers, big, single-engine torpedo bombers, rugged machines that had served across the Pacific. By the standards of the day, they were reliable and well understood. There was nothing experimental about them, and nothing unusual about sending 5 of them up together. The mission had a dull, bureaucratic name, Navigation Problem Number 1. It was a standard overwater navigation exercise that other flights had flown or were flying that same day. The plan was simple and entirely routine. The 5 planes would take off, head roughly east, drop practice bombs on a shoal in the shallows near the Bahamas, then continue east a while longer, turn north, and finally turn back to the southwest to come home to Fort Lauderdale. A long triangle over open water, out, across, and back. It is worth understanding what navigating that triangle actually meant in 1945, because it explains how a small slip could become fatal. There was no satellite navigation, no moving map, no little blue dot showing you where you were. A pilot found his way by dead reckoning. He knew his heading from the compass, his speed from the instruments, and the time from his watch, and from those 3 numbers he calculated in his head and on a chart where he ought to be. Over land, you could check that math against the world below, a coastline, a town, a river, but over open ocean, there is nothing to check it against. Every stretch of water looks like every other stretch of water, and that means a single wrong assumption about which way you turned or where you started a leg doesn't get corrected. It compounds. You fly confidently in precisely the wrong direction, and the sea gives you no reason to doubt yourself. 14 men climbed into the planes that afternoon. Most were trainees, pilots and crewmen still building their hours, with a few hundred flights behind them. Leading them was a man who should have been more than equal to the task. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced combat aviator with around 2,500 hours in the air, much of it in exactly this type of aircraft. He had flown across the Pacific in wartime. A navigation exercise off the coast of Florida was, on paper, the least of his problems. There was one small thing. Taylor was new to this particular base, and he had asked, before takeoff, to be excused from leading the flight. He didn't give a dramatic reason. He just didn't want to take it. There was no one obvious to replace him, and the request was set aside. It is the kind of detail that means nothing on 1,000 ordinary days. And everything on the one day that goes wrong. Takeoff, delayed a little, came at around 2:10 in the afternoon. The planes lifted off, formed up, and flew out over the Atlantic. For the first stretch, everything went exactly to plan. The first sign that something was wrong did not come as an alarm. It came as confusion. Roughly an hour and a half into the flight, well after the practice bombing run, other pilots in the area began to pick up odd radio chatter. It was Flight 19, but the tone was not the clipped procedural talk of a routine exercise. The flight leader sounded lost, and what he said next has been repeated ever since, because it is so strange coming from an experienced pilot on a clear day. Both of his compasses, Taylor reported, were out. He was trying to find Fort Lauderdale. He was over land, he said, but it was broken land, islands, and then the line that defines the whole disaster. He was sure he was over the Florida Keys, but he didn't know how far down the chain he was, and he didn't know how to get back to base. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the hinge on which 14 lives turned. The Keys are a string of islands trailing off the southern tip of Florida to the southwest of Fort Lauderdale. But Flight 19 had flown east, out toward the Bahamas. If Taylor was looking down at broken islands, he was almost certainly looking at the Bahamas, far to the east of home. He believed he was south of base. He was actually well to the east of it, and that single error pointed everything the wrong way, because here is the cruel logic of it. If you genuinely believe you are down in the Keys, southwest of your field, then the way home is to fly north and east, back up toward Florida. But if you are in fact out over the Bahamas, flying north and east does not bring you home. It carries you further out, deeper into the open Atlantic, away from any land at all. Every minute spent correcting the wrong mistake made the real situation worse. The radio picture from that afternoon is fragmentary, but it is haunting. Other voices break in. One trainee pilot is heard saying simply that he doesn't know where they are, that they must have gotten lost after the last turn. At one point, control of the flight seems to pass to another pilot. There is talk of which way to fly. Someone urges heading west, and this was the right instinct, because to the west lay the setting sun, and beyond it, land. Fly toward the sunset, and you fly toward Florida, but the formation never committed to it. Taylor, still convinced of where he was, kept the planes turning in other directions, trying to make a mental map that did not match the sea beneath them. On the ground, others were trying desperately to help. Radio operators on shore picked up the flight and worked to fix its position, and stations along the coast attempted to figure out roughly where the planes were and steer them home. But the radio conditions were poor, the exchanges were garbled, and crucially, the men in the air could not be made to believe the truth, that they were east, over the Atlantic, and that the simple act of flying west would eventually carry them back to the American coast. More than once, the sensible course, turned toward the mainland, toward the lowering sun, was within reach. But a leader who is certain he is somewhere else will not fly the heading that feels, to him, like flying out to sea. Conviction in that cockpit was deadlier than doubt would have been, and the conditions were turning against them. What had been a fine afternoon was sliding into a rough, overcast evening. The sea below was building into heavy swells. The light was going. For pilots already unsure of their position, the loss of the horizon and the failing daylight removed the last easy references they had. Radio contact grew weaker and more broken as the flight drifted further out to sea, the signals fading the way a voice fades when someone walks away from you in the dark. The last messages that were caught suggest the men understood what was now coming. With fuel running low and no land in sight, the plan became grimly practical. When the first aircraft dropped to a critical fuel level, they would all descend and ditch in the ocean together, so that they would at least be in one place. The final transmissions faded out somewhere over the Atlantic in the early evening. After that, there was only static. 5 planes, 14 men, and an open sea going black. The response was immediate and enormous, and it produced the second disappearance that sealed the legend. As soon as it was clear Flight 19 was in serious trouble, the Navy and Coast Guard began launching aircraft to search. Among them were large flying boats, Martin Mariners, sturdy patrol planes built to stay aloft for many hours over water. One of them, on a search assignment that evening, took off from a nearby air station with 13 men aboard. It radioed a routine message a few minutes after takeoff, and then it too went silent. It never returned. For decades, that second vanishing was treated as the deepest part of the mystery, a rescue plane, swallowed by the same sky. But there is a sober and very likely explanation. That model of flying boat had an unhappy nickname among the men who flew it, the flying gas tank, because fuel vapors had a habit of collecting inside the airframe. And on that same stretch of ocean that night, the crew of a passing tanker, the Gaines Mills, reported seeing a burst of flame on the water, a fire perhaps 100 feet high, burning for several minutes at about the time and place the missing plane would have been. A ship searching the area found an oil slick. No survivors and no bodies were ever recovered. Put plainly, the most probable story of the rescue plane is not the supernatural one. It is that a known mundane flaw, fuel vapor and a spark, destroyed the aircraft in a mid-air explosion. Tragic and terrible, but explicable. In the days that followed, the search for Flight 19 became one of the largest of its kind ever mounted. Hundreds of ships and aircraft combed tens of thousands of square miles of ocean and coastline. They were looking for a debris field, a life raft, an oil slick, a single floating wing. Anything. They found nothing. Not one confirmed piece of any of the 5 Avengers has ever been recovered. The sea simply closed over them. Then came the official reckoning. A Navy Board of Inquiry studied the radio logs, the weather, the fuel, the timing, and reached a conclusion that pointed at the flight leader. Taylor, they found, had become confused about his position, had mistaken the islands below for the Florida Keys, and had led the flight away from land until the fuel was gone. In other words, human error in bad conditions with a fatal geographic mistake at its heart. But that finding did not stand as written. Taylor's family pushed back hard against the idea that he had doomed the flight, and the board's language was softened. The official cause was amended to read, in effect, cause unknown. It was a humane decision, a way of not branding a dead man who had flown bravely in the war as the author of a catastrophe. But it had an unintended consequence. By stamping the file, cause unknown, the Navy left an open door, and through that door, in the years to come, would walk one of the most enduring myths of the 20th century. It is worth being precise here about what we know and what we don't. We know the planes were lost. We know from the recorded transmissions that the flight became disoriented and ran low on fuel over rough seas in failing light. We know the rescue plane was very likely destroyed by an explosion. What we do not know, because no wreckage has ever been found, is the exact spot where any of them came down. The story is mostly explained. The graves are still missing, and that gap, the missing wreckage, the softened verdict, is exactly where the legend took root. For about a decade, Flight 19 was remembered as what it was, a painful wartime-era training accident. But in the 1950s and 1960s, a different kind of writer began to look at it. They set the loss of Flight 19 beside other ships and planes that had gone missing in the Western Atlantic, drew lines on a map between Florida, Bermuda, and the Caribbean, and asked whether something stranger than weather and human error was at work. In 1964, a writer named Vincent Gaddis gave the region its unforgettable name in a magazine article. He called it the Bermuda Triangle. The name did what a good name does. It turned a scattering of separate, ordinary tragedies into a single, sinister pattern. Flight 19 became the centerpiece, the perfect case because it had everything. Experienced men, a clear start, confused final words about instruments failing, a rescue plane lost on top of it, and no wreckage. ever to puncture the spell. Later, the story was woven into films and television, most famously, a scene in a major science fiction movie that imagined the lost airman returning decades later, unaged. The myth had escaped the facts entirely. Here is the quiet point underneath all of it. The Bermuda Triangle, studied carefully, is not a place where planes and ships disappear at an unusual rate. It is a heavily traveled stretch of ocean with normal weather hazards and a very normal number of accidents for the traffic it carries. The mystery was assembled after the fact, out of cases like Flight 19, by emphasizing what was strange, omitting what was explained, and leaning hard on the word unknown. A failed compass, a wrong turn, low fuel, a dark and rising sea. These are not supernatural. They are simply how flying could kill you in 1945. And when researchers finally went back to the source documents, the rest of the legend thinned out too. In the 1970s, a librarian named Larry Kusha did something almost no one promoting the mystery had bothered to do. He tracked down the original records for the famous triangle disappearances. The newspaper reports, the inquiry findings, the weather logs. Case after case fell apart under examination. Some mysterious losses had happened in storms the legend never mentioned. Some had occurred nowhere near the triangle at all. A few ships described as vanished had simply been found, their reappearance never as newsworthy as their loss. The pattern, Kusha concluded, was not in the ocean. It was in the storytelling, in how the cases had been written up, trimmed, and arranged to look like a single uncanny force. The triangle, in other words, was largely manufactured on the page. There is something worth holding on to in that. It is more comfortable, in a way, to believe in a triangle, in a single magic spot on the map that explains a loss, than to sit with the truth, which is that 14 men got lost in the ordinary way, did their best, and ran out of sky. The myth offers a tidy answer. The facts offer something harder and more human. Skilled people, a small mistake, bad luck, and the sea. If you find yourself drawn to that, to the real story underneath the famous one, then subscribe, and you'll get a new entry from the archive every Sunday. So let us be exact about what is known. On the 5th of December, 1945, 5 Navy Avengers flew out from Florida on a routine navigation exercise and were lost over the Atlantic with 14 men aboard. Their recorded radio calls show a flight that became disoriented. Its leader, convinced his compasses had failed and that he was somewhere he was not, until the fuel ran low and they ditched at sea in darkness and heavy weather. A rescue flying boat sent after them was lost the same night, with 13 more men, most likely to a mid-air explosion, 27 dead. Not a single confirmed piece of wreckage has ever been recovered. Everything else, the exact place they came down, the precise sequence of those final minutes, and the resting places of 27 men, remains unknown. What doesn't remain a mystery is the cause. There was no triangle. There was weather, a failed instrument, a wrong belief about where they were, and an ocean that does not give its dead back. 5 aircraft in formation against a darkening sky, the radio crackling and then falling quiet. They were not taken by anything stranger than the air and the water. But they were never found, and that absence has been loud enough for 80 years to drown out the truth. The least we can do is say their story plainly.